Hello, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina, and we're going to continue our study today on the book of Job. Last week we talked about the beginning of the book of Job, and in that study we could see that it changed settings from heaven to earth, and then back to heaven, back to earth. And we could see what was going on was God removed the hedge of protection from Job, and Satan began to attack Job, and he was allowed, by the end of it, Satan was allowed to attack every aspect of Job's life, with the only thing that Satan couldn't do was kill Job. The rest of it was just open game. So Job's pain goes from emotional pain, losing his 10 children, his servants, his livestock, to complete physical pain as he's now covered with boils and he's scraping the boils off his skin. And then finally, his wonderful, encouraging wife jumps in, and we know her name is not Barnabas because she encourages her husband to curse God and die. So as we go forward this week, what happens is that Job's 3 closest friends come for a visit. Job 2:11 through 13 in the New American Standard Bible says this: "Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and comfort him. When they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices and wept, and each of them tore his robe, and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great." So we can see that these 3 friends came from 3 different directions. They made an appointment and they came together. And from a distance, they scarcely recognize him. And that should tell us something. If there's been an emotional change, we'd still be able to recognize somebody, but there must have been a pretty stark physical change in Job. It could have been weight loss. It could have been just looking completely gaunt, or just, standing in a frail manner when usually he would be, full of energy. We don't know exactly what it was, but the change had been so great that not only did they not recognize him, but when they did, it just broke their hearts. In verse 12, we can see that they tore their robes and tossed dust over their heads. Tearing robes is an act of mourning, and it also shows sadness and anger. In Genesis 37, when Reuben returns to the pit where the brothers had all put Joseph, and Joseph is gone, he tore his robe. And the same occurred when the 11 remaining sons told Jacob that Joseph was dead. Genesis 37:34 through 35 in the New American Standard Bible says this: "So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, 'Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son.' So his father wept for him." We didn't see Job mourning for his children in this manner. Doesn't mean he didn't, but we weren't told that he did. And it could have just been that Job was just trusting in the Lord in the middle of it. It hadn't hurt, and there's no chance that it didn't hurt. And we could see how Job loved his children because he was performing those burnt sacrifices for them every single time they had a gathering. So now we see our new cast members for this week's study. And the new cast members, first is Eliphaz the Temanite. And Eliphaz means "my God is fine gold," and Temanite means southward. Teman was a grandson of Esau, so that's one of the reasons that Bible scholars place this in the same time of Genesis. Okay, we're going to give him the nickname of Eliphaz the Eloquent. Next, we see Zophar the Naamathite. Zophar means sparrow, and Naamathite means pleasantness. What this little birdie has to say is not very pleasant. We're going to give him the nickname of Zophar the Zealot. Finally, we see Bildad the Shuhite. Bildad means confusing love, while Shua means wealth. And we're going to nickname him Bildad the Biased. He might be the shortest man in the Bible. We've heard about that wee little man of Zacchaeus, but if Bildad is shoe height, he's not any taller than a shoe, so he is certainly the shortest man in the Bible. The last verse in chapter 2 demonstrates how we should encourage others while they are suffering. So what these friends did, at least at the onset, is they sat down on the ground with Job, and they sat there silently for 7 days and 7 nights. Okay? And they could see Job's pain and feel Job's pain, but notice that they were just being there with him. And I think that personally, I can see how this is much more effective than condemning someone, giving them advice, because our advice can be bad advice just as easily as it can be good advice. And we can be piling on rather than helping. And just to sit down and cry with them was very helping. When someone's in physical pain, we can wipe their head with a cloth. Today, we can give them medication that might help a little bit. We can pray for them, but the pain is theirs alone to bear. Physical pain is something we can't shoulder for someone else. Job's pain was physical, but it was more than physical. He had boils, he had his loss of his children, the loss of livestock. Possibly he was even concerned with the livestock and the servants being gone. How was he even going to eat? But he was certainly in pain. He continued to trust God through the pain. In those 7 days, there was no speaking, but certainly there was a lot of thinking going on. Job and his 3 friends all seemed to be coming up with their eloquent speeches that they were going to give us in the coming verses of what they were thinking about the whole situation. Another thing we should notice here is in that process, the 7 days of mourning. Today in the Jewish religion, there's something called a Shiva. And when they sit Shiva, basically there have to be at least 10 men of the age of 13 or older, which is the bar mitzvah age, right? And 10 together, at least 10, forms a minyan. And they do the same thing. They sit on low stools. They can't shave, they can't get a haircut, they can't leave for any reason except going to temple is acceptable. They're supposed to dress respectfully, but this is exactly the same process when someone dies in a family and they sit there and they pray for the person. It's an example of mourning, all right? They're trying to gather together to support their friend or family member. These men sat on the ground, not just on low stools. They sat on the ground for 7 days. So then in Job 3, our suffering begins as these 4 men begin to argue, albeit very orderly, all right? And the order is just an amazing thing to see. To me, it looks like a wrestling tag team match. So on one side, you see the team of Job, and on the other side, you see the 3 friends. And Job speaks, first of all, and then Eliphaz takes his turn, and then it goes back to Job, and then it goes to Bildad, and then it goes back to Job, and then it goes to Zophar, and then it goes back to Job. And you can see 3 cycles of this, except on the 3rd cycle, when Zophar doesn't take his turn, but another man steps into his place and speaks. And then finally, we see an authoritative response. Notice that no one interrupts the other. So this is very orderly. It's not the kind of argument that we would see today. Everybody takes their turn, and it's done in a very genteel manner. No one interrupts each other. They speak their piece, and then it's the other person's turn. Job is alone on his team, and the other team gets to rest. And in that rest, they get to come up with their next response. And it's very poetic and very eloquent, and a lot of times very wrong, which is interesting. So let's hear first what Job has to say after sitting in silence for 7 days. Let the games begin. In this corner, weighing 150 pounds, down from his playing weight of 190 pounds, the most righteous man on the earth. He recently lost his title of the most wealthy man on earth. What do you have to say, Job? And he begins by cursing the day of his birth. So let's read Job 3, verses 1 through 12. Afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said a boy is conceived. May that day be darkness. Let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and black gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle on it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the day of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful shout enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day. Who are prepared to rouse Leviathan? Let the stars of its twilight be darkened. Let it wait for light, but have gone. Let it not see the breaking dawn, because it did not shut the opening of my mother's womb, or hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth? Come forth from the womb and expire. Why did the knees receive me, and why the breasts that I should suck? Again, Job 3, 1 through 12 in the New American Standard Bible. The book of Job is about righteousness. It's sometimes more subtle than overt. But remember, we talked about this last week. Paul said in Romans 3:10, there is none righteous, no, not one. That restates Psalm 14:3 that says this, they have all turned aside, together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Remember, we don't earn heaven or deepen our relationship with God based on our righteousness. Heaven as our eternal future, forgiveness, grace, God's love are all based on his righteousness, and they're his gifts that he gives to us. So watch closely to see where Job begins to step away from God's righteousness and step out on his own with self-righteousness. And remember that self-righteousness is sin. Jesus explained it this way in Luke 18, 9 through 14. And he also told this parable to some people who trusted in themselves, that they were righteous and viewed others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and was praying this to himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Once again, Luke 18, 9 to 14 in the New American Standard Bible. We should never lose sight of his righteousness and our unrighteousness, his worthiness and our unworthiness, his holiness and our unholiness, his forgiveness, a gift from him, which is the greatest gift that we receive. It's a cycle in the life of believers. After we're saved, we notice more sin in the lives of others. And part of the reason for this is before we were saved, we didn't even really know what sin was. So God reveals to us what sin is. And then instead of looking inside, we have that tendency as new believers to look outside and see the sin in others and want to fix that, want to correct that. We tell that one person, because of this, you're going to hell. And it's the truth that sin does send us to hell without the covering of Jesus Christ. But our judgment isn't going to draw someone else to the Lord. And that's one of those things that happens in the lives of many, is that you get into this self-righteousness, this holier than thou attitude where we start to look down on others, we start to judge others, and it's no surprise that Jesus encouraged us to love others. It's through that love that we draw people to Jesus. And sometimes that view of sin, we need to remember that even though we're saved, it's still being clothed in his righteousness rather than being clothed in something that we've earned, that we've created ourselves. We have no righteousness apart from Jesus Christ. So that's the thing. Again, we need to be aware of this difference, this fine line between righteousness that he gives us and self-righteousness. And we can see that in the book of Job. We'll see when it happens, okay? Job's opening monologue is not much different than what most of us have either stated or felt. Basically, he's asking why. And I want you to remember that we don't have to address God in order to be questioning God. These statements made from Job here, it's not like he's calling out to God saying, why'd you do this to me? But really, that's what he's doing, because the questions he's asking to his friends are questions that his friends can't answer. So the only one that can answer these questions is God, and he's questioning God why all this happens. Why was I even born? If it was all about coming to this point right here, this pain, why was I even born if my children were going to be killed? Why was I even born if my servants were going to die? Why? He keeps asking this over and over again. And in fact, in chapter 3, we see that word why 5 times. He keeps asking it. So what's the point? The thing is, and we've talked about this before, it's based on either being earthly minded or heavenly minded. Earthly mindedness is kind of a silly thing. We can't help it because it's what we see, feel, touch, smell, taste. It's what's around us. But that walking by faith and not by sight is what we're asked to do, because it's not about what happens here for 70 years. Again, mathematically, if we were just to compare 70 years on this earth to eternity, we realize that the life on this earth is a blink. That's all it is. It's going to be gone in just a second. And then, we've got all eternity with Jesus Christ. If you were to ask a person, let's say that God's plan for a person was to bring one person to the Lord, to share the gospel with one person. And it might not be just this momentary thing. It could have been discipleship of walking with that person. But let's say that that's God's calling for a person's life. We don't know that God doesn't work that way. But if that was the case, if that person had to suffer through 70 years on this earth, if he had pain for 70 years, but that's what God had as a purpose and plan in his life, would it be worth it? Would it be worth 70 years of enduring pain for one person to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ? And the answer is unequivocally yes, right? That's how God's family grows, is that we can touch some other life and think about how you never know how many people that person is going to touch. And in the same manner with Job asking all these questions, the question of why is never going to get a completely definitive answer when you're asking God, because the answer has it touches so many other things. It just, think about, for an example, let's say with what Job endured here, is it even possible that if God would have told him that, hey, all that you're enduring is going to become a book, and then for the next thousands and thousands and thousands of years, believers are going to read this book and be blessed by it? Would Job have been able to understand that in any way? And the truth is, no. It's far-reaching. It's farther than Job could have ever understood. But God had many, many purposes in what Joel was enduring. One of those purposes, and we've talked about this before as well, that God always has redemption on his mind. So in most situations that God puts us into, there might be a bigger answer of that question why, but part of it is God wants to draw us closer to him. He wants us closer to him. So he puts us in situations where we're going to deepen that relationship with him, deepen that walk with him. The most that we ever get to do when God answers a question of that degree of why is we get to peek through the tiniest little peephole into understanding maybe a little bit of a piece of why. Maybe he gives us some little bit of understanding, but it would be impossible for him to answer that in a way where he gave us all the reasons he put us in those situations. And this takes me back, 10 years, 12 years, I'm not exactly sure when it was, but I was trying to get a new job, changing professions, I was teaching tennis and my body was just worn out, and I was praying about this job, and there was an opening that I fit perfectly for it. And the way I looked at it, in every way, it would be a perfect answer to a lot of my needs, and it would be a perfect fit of my talents and abilities. And I went through 4 months of going to boards and going through very difficult interviews. And at each step of the way, they interviewed a lot of people, and each step of the way, I was rated as the top, the number one. And they had 2 positions open, and I didn't get it. And when I didn't get it, this anger built up in me towards God. And it's kind of a sad thing that I had trouble getting past it. And I walked with that anger for 6 months. And I got to the point where I understood in my brain what God had to say about it. And that I needed to just trust him. But it just didn't ever make that transformation from my brain to my heart. That 18-inch journey, my heart was just still angry and broken over it. And one day, I was still reading the Bible, and I was focusing on God's promises, and I realized, Romans 8:28 is a great example. All things work together to those who love the Lord and are the called according to his purposes. All things, not some things, not most things even, all things, every single thing, God is working together in the lives of his followers, his believers. And here's an example of me not trusting God. If God's given me that promise and I'm not walking in that promise, it hit me one day that I was calling God a liar. And it made me feel so shameful, just so sad. It broke me to the point where it's like I was just so ashamed of how I treated God, acted toward God for 6 months of this anger. And I realized that walking on his promises, if he says he's going to do something, if we don't believe that, we're calling him a liar. And I felt so shameful for that. Job got to that same place in his own way. God puts us in these situations for us to grow. And there's some things we do well, there's some things we fail. And even in my situation, I failed for 6 months, but after that 6 months, I learned from it. I grew from it. It changed me, and I became a different person based on it. So now let's finish chapter 3. And this is verses 13 through 26 in the New American Standard Bible. For now, I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept then. I would have been at rest, with kings and with counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who were filling their houses with silver, or like a miscarriage which is discarded. I would not be as infants that never saw light. There the wicked cease from raging, and there the weary are at rest. The prisoners are at ease together. They do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. They do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who suffers, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but there is none, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice greatly and exult when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? For my groaning comes at the sight of my food, and my cries pour out like water. For what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I am not at rest, but turmoil comes. This is beautiful poetically But most of us who went through school and studied poetry remember trying to figure out what the poem meant. And there's some difficulty in understanding every little inkling and every little symbol that is in this poetic speaking. But what we can really see is just Job is suffering over not understanding why he's enduring this. Why does God allow this in his life, and he follows the Lord, and doesn't allow this in the lives of others who don't follow the Lord? David in the Psalms cried out in the same way, not understanding how the unrighteous seem to be blessed. But if we think about it, let's say that the best part of an unrighteous man's life is during his 70 years on this earth, where for us, this pales in comparison to what heaven's going to be. This is nothing. And so if they even have a little bit of success here, but then they're destined to hell for all of eternity, who are we to question that? It's not about now, it's about heaven. It's about our future, our hope in Jesus Christ. So we saw 5 times in this chapter, Job specifically uses the word why. And he's not questioning his friends. They don't have the answer. He's questioning God. Verse 20 gives us some insight. It says, why does God give light to some who suffer and give life to those with bitter souls instead of helping Job now? Why does God give life to those who want to die and not give help to Job who wants to live? Why is this happening to Job? Why never has a simple answer with God. There's so many levels. Again, don't forget Romans 8:28, that if God is working all things together in all the lives of all believers at the same moment, there are so many ramifications of each decision. God is refining us, right? It's part of his purpose and his plan. In the refining process, let's say we're refining gold. We're removing the impurities. We're adding heat to remove the impurities to make it pure gold. And in case of the heart, he takes our hearts and he adds fire. He adds pressure, exactly like we're seeing here. And he makes those hearts pure hearts, all right? Pure hearts. So next week, we're going to see the response from Job's friends. God bless you from Morrisville, North Carolina. Once again, Garry Glaub here. Take care. Purify my heart, let me be as gold and precious silver. Purify my heart, let me be as gold, pure gold, refiner's fire. My heart's one desire is to be holy, set apart for you, Lord. I choose to be holy, set apart for you, my Master, ready to do your will. Purify my heart, cleanse me from within, and make me holy. Purify my heart, cleanse me from my sin. Deep within, refiner's fire. My heart's one desire is to be holy, set apart for you, Lord. I choose to be holy, set apart for for you, my master, ready to do